There is a moment that many caregivers reach that is very difficult to explain to other people because from the outside, it sounds kind of small. It sounds like, well, he just didn't want to take a shower. But when you're living with this inside your home, you know it's not only about taking the shower anymore. Hey, Christian caregiver, welcome back to Dementia Caregiver Support for Christians, the podcast where we help Bible-believing Christians or faith-driven caregivers look at dementia caregiving specifically through a biblical worldview, through the Christian lens. And today's topic is about taking showers. You know that can be extremely difficult. And then you hear the person you have asked to take a shower before you see them. They are walking up and down the hallway, pacing. You already know what time it is. You already know that it's time that it has to happen. And honestly, a part of you might already be bracing for what could happen next. So you try softly and gently, "Hey, honey, let's go take a shower." And immediately you notice the difference. Your husband's face tightens, his body changes, he gets loud and says, "No." Maybe he curses, and he never used to. Maybe he yells. Maybe he tells you that you're controlling him. Probably he tells you to just leave him alone. And now suddenly, there you are standing in the hallway, wondering how has this all of a sudden become your life? This is the same man who worked for 40 years. This is your husband who has led your family. The same man who never, ever would speak to you this way. And now something as basic as taking a shower is turning into conflict, fear, resistance, exhaustion, pacing, yelling, and sometimes a complete shutdown. And what makes this especially hard for Christian caregivers is that many of us are trying very hard to respond the right way. You're trying to be patient, gentle, respectful, calm. You're following all of the advice, not to escalate things, not to shame your husband. You're trying to preserve his dignity and his autonomy. You are loving him well. And yet, this keeps happening anyway. And that is what's important, because many caregivers stay focused on improving that specific interaction, which is important to do, while never stopping to ask what is required of us in this situation, and is that still working at all? Those are two very different things. So you start to adjust yourself. You think, maybe I asked too directly. Maybe my tone of voice was off. That's always mine. Maybe we should try it in the morning. Maybe we should do it after coffee or after lunch. Or if I had explained it in a different way. Or if I'd stayed calmer. Maybe if I make it sound like his idea. Maybe if I don't push so hard. And all of these responses are appropriate and for a while appear like they can work. And then the next thing happens, or the shower comes back again. And this is where I want you to slow down and really look carefully at what is happening in your life. Because many of us are still approaching these moments as if their cooperation is going to come back. As though somewhere inside all of this, Our old relational dynamic is still fully accessible if I can just find the right approach. But what if that has changed entirely? What if the issue is not communication? What if the issue is that the requirements of the situation have fundamentally changed and everybody is still trying to operate as though it hasn't? Those are two very different things because a shower is still required. Hygiene is still required. It matters. The basic hygiene has to occur. Their health through basic hygiene is very important. Skin integrity still matters. And staying safe, both humans involved, staying safe is vitally important. The requirement that you have to provide care has not disappeared. And the old way that the task used to happen might no longer be possible. Those constraints have changed. Many caregivers feel this long before they know how to explain it. You start to realize, I cannot count on this going smoothly anymore. Then you may realize, I cannot count on this happening voluntarily anymore. And then finally, I don't actually know what happens now when he refuses. That is usually where the deeper fear starts to enter the picture. Because now we're not only dealing with the inconvenience of trying to get somebody into a shower who doesn't want to take a shower. Now you are standing in the middle of a situation where you are struggling with changing authority, increasing dependence, your own limited endurance and capacity to provide the care, a changing marital dynamic, changing safety realities, and nobody has prepared you for that, particularly in Christian circles, because most Christians have beautiful instincts towards dignity and kindness and honor and loving well. But we often have very little practical application for what faithful stewardship looks like when our person's cognition is no longer supporting reasonable decision-making capacities. So, us caregivers stay stuck trying to preserve a version of the relationship that the dementia has already changed. And that grief is enormous and has to be acknowledged. Because somewhere inside you, you still want him to walk into that bathroom like he always has and take a shower. You want the partnership. You're longing for agreement, cooperation, recognition. And every time this happens, a part of you is confronting the painful reality that those things may no longer be reliable. Not because he doesn't want to, not because you haven't tried hard enough to help, not because you're not faithful, or because you're not praying enough, or because whatever comes into our mind about the things that we need to be doing better, but because dementia changes what a person can consistently process, tolerate, sequence, understand, and cooperate with. And many caregivers keep trying to solve this at the level of the moment, at the level of the problem, the symptom. How do I stop the yelling? How do I keep him calm? How do I convince him to get in the shower? While underneath all of that, a much larger question is slowly forming. What do you do, or what happens now when basic care, like a shower or hygiene, is required and cooperation is no longer happening? That's not merely a communication problem. That is a caregiving reality problem. And many families delay facing that reality because they're hoping that the next interaction will somehow restore the old normal. Now, these repeated patterns, they matter. Patterns tell us the truth long before people are ready to even name it. And one of the things we help caregivers do is stop looking at things as symptoms or isolated incidents and start looking at what is coming next, what the trajectory is of what is happening, because that trajectory will tell you where it is going. If showering or taking a bath is escalating now, what happens 6 months from now? What happens if you're the spouse and you die? Who's going to help them? What happens if they cannot help you walk or their transfers decline further? What happens when toileting needs change? When physical assistance becomes necessary? What happens when one person alone can no longer do this? These are not questions to make you be afraid. These are questions for you to look at your caregiving situation through the lens of Christian stewardship and discernment. Faithful caregiving is not pretending. Hard things are not happening. Hard things are happening. If you are a dementia caregiver, hard things are happening. Faithful caregiving is learning to see your reality truthfully early enough that you can make decisions and change things before a crisis fully overtakes your family. And that is where many caregivers start to recognize. After the crisis has started happening, this isn't just a difficult situation anymore. Something deeper needs to change. However, we also need to recognize that sometimes we wait too long, and then the crisis does overtake us. However, I know you haven't stopped loving him, and love alone is not going to take away the increasing care requirements. And this is where many caregivers often need permission to stop asking, how do I make this go back to how it was? And start to ask, what is now required because things are no longer how they were? They're different questions. And honestly, it is usually the beginning of seeing and thinking clearer about your situation. Because until the changing reality that you live in is acknowledged, caregivers keep walking back into that same hallway, seeing the same pacing, having the same argument, feeling the same exhaustion, and hoping that somehow or another, this time might be different. Meanwhile, the underlying requirement has changed and keeps increasing. And eventually the situation itself will force decisions that nobody wants to make. So if you're listening today and you recognize this pattern, I don't want you to feel condemned for this. I want you to see the recognition, because many faithful caregivers stay stuck here much longer than they need to. Not because they don't love, but because nobody is helping them recognize what the repeated situation that they're living in is already telling them. And often the decision has already been forming long before you're ready to name it. That is where clearer discernment begins. Not with panicking, not with shame, not with forcing a decision, but with truthfully seeing what is happening. And if you are ready to stay connected to this work, I invite you to go to thinkdifferentdementia.com and check out our resources there. But for now, I want you to look at what's happening in your life and in your situation and decide, what do you need to change? And as I try to end all my podcasts, may the Lord bless you and keep you.